If you enjoy the following clip from my podcast, please like, subscribe, and head over to the full episode of The Backseat Fighter, the most honest, most thoughtful, and certainly the best MMA podcast in the game. My name's Charles Binns. Thank you for watching. But let's get into this co-main event. Now, this for me was a fight I was so excited for. I did a couple TikToks where I kind of took it from obviously episode 8, but really wanted to highlight this co-main event because you really did have a matchup of two elite undefeated fighters. You know, this is combined the biggest undefeated record coming into a UFC fight in history, I believe, at 33-0 before the fight took place. But Shavkat Rakhmonov comes out with the unanimous decision, I believe. And, you know, let's talk a little bit about this fight. Coming into this fight, I really did believe that Shavkat was going to be able to push the pace and eventually try and go for a submission. I didn't really see a knockout coming, to be honest with you, just because of the way Ian Garry is so elusive, so intelligent on the feet. And in order for Shavkat to close that distance, I did believe he was going to have to grapple Ian Garry a lot against the cage. And that is what we saw. Because if you look at their fights, their comparative fights with Jeff Neal, obviously Shavkat gets into one of the best fights I've ever seen with Jeff Neal. Absolute war. Gets rocked himself, but ends up choking him out basically with one arm on the feet with kind of like a neck crank, rear naked choke with one arm. It was insane, that highlight. But against Ian Garry, Jeff Neal wasn't, if you look at Jeff Neal versus Ian Garry fight, Ian Garry was circling the octagon, popping him with the jab, doing a great job of throwing that high kick before going low with it. You know, entering with those lead knees and throwing the right hand off of it or throwing the elbow to exit the exchange, and would circle and kind of pop him and then kind of stand his ground and then, you know, control the distance and really dominate the range in that fight, which gave him, for me, that unanimous decision. I mean, Jeff Neal wasn't really able to land too much of a glove on Ian Garry. And I expected actually Shavkat to kind of see the way Ian Garry moves around the octagon, and when he does kind of stand his base and sit there and wait to kind of be in the exchanges when he stops circling, I expected Shavkat to be able to actually strike with him in that range and catch him there and time him. But it, you know, I think a lot of people underestimate the ability of Ian Garry, and even Shavkat seemed to have difficulties when, you know, I believe in that second round when Ian Garry started to build. I was amazed about how he was able to control the timing, control the range. And I think that's why we did see a lot of Shavkat just grabbing him, tying him up against the fence and trying to body wrestle him. And what I was so impressed with, I know I'm speaking a lot about Ian Garry here, but we've never seen somebody make Shavkat look so, you know, human and have to compete in this way. Shavkat was trying to drag him to the ground. You know, he had the lock with his arms around the body and tried to, you know, tip him over and try and, you know, trip him and get the takedowns, but he wasn't able to. And that's just because Ian Garry's hip flexibility and balance is so phenomenal that he wasn't really taken to the ground as quickly as we thought he would be. And, you know, that's credit to him. And I'm sure Shavkat has given him credit. I saw his interview with TNT Sports after the fight, and he did say, you know, Ian Garry's a really difficult guy and it was a competitive fight. So, you know, after the fight, I did believe that Shavkat had done enough to win. I mean, I'm not arguing that Ian Garry won at all, but Ian Garry did such a good job, and I believe he did a lot more than people thought he would do. And, you know, I could potentially see him winning that 2, 4, and 5, to be honest with you. But, you know, I thought Shavkat won, but, you know, I did think maybe it would be a split decision, to be honest with you, because I did think it was a really competitive fight. You know, the submission attempts from both guys, very dangerous. I mean, when Ian Garry caught Shavkat in a submission, it looked very, very bad for a bit before Shavkat was finally able to get out. And a lot of us were a little bit nervous because, you know, one of the people I was watching with is a huge Shavkat fan, my friend Emmett. And, you know, he was a little bit nervous when Shavkat got caught in that submission. But, you know, for the neutral, he was able to get out of it, and we still had an amazing fight on our hands. But to be honest with you, I was just so impressed by both of these guys. It wasn't the most high action, you know, war that maybe some people were expecting. But, you know, through doing a bunch of tape study, I didn't necessarily believe that was going to happen. I thought we were going to see a technical, strategic fight between these two guys where they didn't really want to give up an inch and put themselves in too much of a vulnerable situation. And in the start, you know, the first and second round, that's what we kind of saw, right? Kind of hesitancy between the two. But as the fight developed, obviously, fatigue, timing, learning each other's, you know, takedown entries. I know Ian Garry did well. He got caught with a takedown, fully taken down, put on his back. And the second time Shavkat tried to use that entry, Ian Gary did a great job of reversing it and kind of getting on top himself. But for me, Shavkat just showed again why he's so elite, and he showed his ability to kind of intelligently fight. I mentioned in the predictions that he has such a high fight IQ that for me, he demonstrated most recently in that Wonderboy fight with that submission, the way he was able to grab that wrist to make sure Wonderboy wasn't able to post and kind of reject or stop the takedown. In this fight, I think the IQ was the fact that, as I said, Ian Gary is going to circle out, and then when he stands still, that's when you got to try and close him down. And I think, after that second round where Ian Gary started having success on the feet, Shavkat realized, like, I'm not going to be able to necessarily just pick this guy off if I stand in front of him because he is so good and so accurate. I'm just going to have to tie him up and make this a dirty fight, which I think he was able to do. I think that's what gave him the win. And at the end of the day, I don't think this really takes away from Ian Gary as a loss, even though he's not undefeated anymore. I think we're going to see this fight again. I think Shavkat knows that. I think Ian Gary knows that. And now what we do have is the confirmed Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Belal Muhammad for the title next. Wow, that's going to be a crazy fight because, Shavkat did look a little bit more human this time than we've ever seen him before in terms of the competitiveness of the fight. We've seen Shavkat in, vulnerable situations before the UFC, obviously against Jeff Neal in the UFC. But, Belal's pace is ridiculous. His ability to keep pressure on you, just chain wrestle you. And I think Belal Muhammad's stand-up is so underrated. He's got a great jab, in my opinion, great timing on the stand-up at the moment. And he's really developed that recently. I've always been a big fan of Belal Muhammad, to be honest with you. You can ask everybody I watch UFC with. But I really do believe that's a competitive fight, and I don't know how that's going to come out yet. I've got to think about it. I'm not going to make an early prediction right now. But I just wanted to say to both of those guys, what an absolute fight in terms of technical ability, strategy, competitiveness, kind of just a high level elite fight that, although there was a lot of kind of, vying for positions and kind of not much happening on the fence sometimes. It was just because they were so always one step ahead of each other and kind of stopping each other from doing certain things. And, I was just very, very impressed by Ian Machado's Gary's technical ability, and obviously Shavkat's ability to win this fight now. It puts him in that number one title, the number one contender and title fight. So absolutely electric fight, in my opinion, for the real fans of MMA. And, if you're a new person watching these fights, this is like the highest level it can get in terms of strategy and technical ability. So I hope everybody enjoyed watching this fight.